Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to the last Showdown show of 2023 for us here at Establish the Run. I am Gary Hartman, joined by a on the road Cody Main. Cody, how you doing?
I'm good. This feels like the holiday season that never ends. So I'm on the road. I know you're on the road too as well. We'll try to get through Jets, Browns, and what a way to kick off Week 17.
Yeah, I'm on the road, but if you guys recognize this background, this is like my home and home. This is like my secondary home field at my in-laws house. So I'm here quite a bit. Unfortunately, I usually bring my mic with me, so you're stuck with your AirPods. I forgot my mic at home, but I digress. We are finally here. It's week 17. If you are a best ball bro like me, you've been grinding these matchups for months and months and months. So I've known about this Jets Browns Thursday night matchup for literally since like whenever the schedule came out. I've thought about this game. Unfortunately for me, it won't matter. I do not have any finals best ball teams. Ran a little bad last week, but I'm excited for everyone and all my friends out there that do. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the DFS slate tonight. Cody, it's an interesting one. The JoeFlaco return, or I guess this game in Cleveland, the JoeFlaco revenge narrative to his late stage Jets career. Elijah Moore on that same front. Obviously, talking to kind of make one more mention of those best ball teams. I know the most common player in best ball mania for finals is Amari Cooper after his outbreak last week. So there's going to be a lot on the line for people tonight. There's no doubt about it. When you were going through this game from a one-game DFS perspective, what stood out to you?
Yeah, who would have thought then when you were stacking up Week 17 with Deshaun Watson and Aaron Rodgers in mind and Alan Lazard, maybe Corey Davis if you were drafting early enough that we would in fact be dealing with JoeFlaco on the Browns and Trevor Siemian, not even Zach Wilson on the Jets side. So a lot to take in here. I think a lot to kind of digest from a matchup related perspective, just really high level quickly off the top. I think salary matters quite a bit here. I know we like to talk about this, macro view of the slate before we dive into the player analysis. And I think if you're leaving like 500 or more on the table tonight, you're going to go a long way to being unique. The aforementioned Amari Cooper is 11-2, very expensive. I think the top priced skill position players are the best plays on the slate, and they were appropriately priced by DraftKings, making it difficult to get to all of them. And then you kind of have this really barren wasteland down below, I don't know, we'll call it 4K and below from a skill position perspective, just because of these teams both being so concentrated up at the top of their offenses with Amari Cooper on the Browns side, David Njoku, of course, Jerome Ford. And then really on the other side, it's Bree Hall and the Garrett Wilson show. So I think what you're going to end up seeing is the field trying to jam in as many of these top guys as possible. A really good way to do that, well, I'll take that back. Maybe not a good way to do that, but I think a common way people will try to go about that is by playing DST at captain. Of course, we'll get to that at the end of the show and the merits of playing DST at captain at the end of the show. But I do think that that's going to be a common construction. Get the 4 to 5K defense in there, whether it be the Jets or the Browns, and then try to load up on as many of those top skill guys as you possibly can. And really, as a result, as you see the roster construction table there in the article, you're going to see a lot of Browns heavy stuff, whether that come in the form of 4-2 or 5-1, which I think could get steamed up even more. When you talk about the best plays in the slate, of course, they're going to come from the Browns side. 7-point home favorite. JoeFlaco has been balling. Amari Cooper just put up a 50 ball. You have Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt, David Njoku, even the cheap guys, Cedric Tillman on this side. Of course, the Browns DST. I think there's a lot more reason, even against a tough Jets defense, a lot more reasons to get excited about the Browns offense than there is to get excited about the Jets offense that is orchestrated by Trevor Siemian at this point. So don't be surprised if when you flip the cards over, you see even more total ownership on the Browns skill players.
Yeah, Browns team been something else. To me, Kevin Stefanski, coach of the year, 4 quarterbacks, going to make the playoffs, 10 wins. JoeFlaco, potentially getting over the double-digit win mark, I should say. JoeFlaco, been a revelation for this team while they've continued to have one of the best defenses in the league. That said, there are ways to get unique, I think, on this slate. If you thought this game could get closer, the Jets do have a couple skill position players that are still on the elite side of things if you think they can make a dent in this game. So let's dive in to position by position stuff, starting with the quarterback position and the aforementioned JoeFlaco. He is 10-6 here, 63% total ownership. No doubt it's a tough matchup to throw to the outside. He's been gunslinging down the field on the outside. So you can make an argument that this is a little bit of a tougher spot for Flacco, but you gotta be encouraged by what we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been pretty impressive what the Browns have done with Flacco. I mean, he comes in and it's truly been, as I wrote in the article, an offensive renaissance for the 38-year-old Joe Flacco and this Browns offense. One of the teams that was the highest in rush rate over expectation. Now, over the last 4 weeks, one of the highest in the league in terms of pass rate over expectation, posting games of plus 5%, plus 7%, plus 9%, and plus 5% since 38-year-old Joe Flacco took over. Now we're back home. Browns are as 7+ point favorites. I think that line keeps moving in their direction. 7.5, 8 points, maybe now at this point. Touchdown favorites at home against a Jets defense that is not really inviting the pass against them. Most teams that are facing the Jets, whether it be for, because of scoreboard success or for other reasons, most teams just choosing to try and run the ball more than not against the Jets defense. So I do think we see a little bit of a pulling in of the reins, if you will, for Joe Flacco and this Browns passing attack. I think they'll try to establish it a little bit more, and I think they'll probably have a little bit of success in doing so. All of that to say, I still think that Joe Flacco is probably a top cash game target. You have some skill position players that you want to get excited about, but we don't know exactly where the ball is going. It's been fairly evenly distributed between Cooper and Njoku, Tillman, David Bell, these guys getting involved a little bit as well as pass catchers. So I think the best way to soak up that Browns offense, again, at home as 7+ point home favorites, I think the best way to soak it up in cash game contests is with Flacco. I'm looking at his captain ownership, though. Captain ownership seems quite high, and maybe that's because the field doesn't feel so confident in getting up to the 11-2 for Amari Cooper, or maybe feels a little bit less sure about David Njoku. But I think the skill players here are better captain options on the Brown side than is Joe Flacco. So for me, this is going to be a position where I probably play him in cash, probably going to be at or around the field at flex in small and large field tournaments, probably going to be way under at captain.
Yeah, it seems like a theme with some of the more expensive quarterback on most of these slates. And obviously when you take into account matchup, and something I'll talk more about when we get to the Brown skill position receivers, but matchup in general, I know we talk about cornerback wide receiver matchups and are they really worth their weight in fantasy football? And that's a big debate. I think when you're looking for tiebreakers on a slate like this, on a single game slate, I think they could be used in that capacity, in my opinion. We'll talk about that more when we get to receivers. All right, Trevor Siemian, we've seen this trend, especially in the second half of the season, where, okay, we're getting some random quarterbacks starting on a one-game slate because of all the quarterback injuries, and they aren't going to project overly well. They're kind of on the cheaper end, and the field's just not getting there. So I've been interested in these guys in large field tournaments, and I know it's a very tough matchup, and I know Trevor Siemian was on his couch for half this year, but I kind of, once again, if we're going to get sub 30% on one of the two quarterbacks, I'm kind of interested again.
Yeah, and there's a few spots on the slate that I think kind of break the ownership model. This is definitely one of them. We'll talk about the Browns DST. That's going to be a recurring theme of this show at the end of the show. That's another one that I think is going to break the ownership model. I think I could probably come down quite a bit here on Trevor Siemian. We might see like right at 20%, maybe even get in the high teens for Trevor Siemian. Nobody is going to want to play this guy against the Browns defense as a 7-point road underdog. I think most people would just rather say, okay, give me Garrett Wilson, give me Bree Hall. If I can't get to those guys, I'll drop all the way down to the Jets defense. Maybe I can talk myself into Tyler Conklin. I just don't think you're going to see a lot of people try to afford Trevor Siemian and instead go to the players that are priced directly around him. And honestly, from a base perspective, I think that's probably fair. This has been a Jets offense that has kind of been leaning on the pass-centric side all season, whether it's been Trevor Siemian, Tim Boyle, Zach Wilson. They've kind of leaned a little bit pass-heavy. They rank 5th in situation-neutral pass rate. They rank 11th in pass rate over expectation. However, now they get a Cleveland defense that ranks 1st in pass EPA per play and is defending the league's 4th lowest pass rate over expectation through week 16. So, maybe they dial it back a little bit. I just don't know if the scoreboard is really going to allow them to completely pull back from dropping Trevor Siemian back as much as they need to. I just don't think he's going to be efficient. So from a base case, I don't think there's a need to play Trevor Siemian in cash. As much as we like quarterbacks on single game slates, don't think you need to go there. I think you can just soak up a majority of the Jets' offensive production via Wilson and via Hall. But in those lineups where, we're talking tournaments now, in those lineups where I'm playing Garrett Wilson at captain, Bree Hall at captain, maybe I'm playing multiple Jets pass catchers in flex, or maybe even just a single Jets pass catcher in flex. I think that from kind of a math perspective, from a leverage perspective, I think we're getting low enough ownership here on Trevor Siemian that he makes sense as a positive leverage GPP option, specifically in large field, where I think that ownership is going to get really, really low.
I completely agree. And the hope is that you're not worrying too much about efficiency. You're just worrying about volume. Like they're playing from behind. We saw Davis Mills come in the second half last week on Christmas Eve and throw the ball 32 times against this Browns team. Now, he wasn't efficient. He was under 50% completion percentage, but 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. You'd be hoping for a full game sample of that for Trevor Siemian, where they're forced to throw. He's able to get paired with a Garrett Wilson or Conklin or something like that. And they kind of backdoor their way there as underdogs coming from behind. So at that kind of ownership, I would be very willing to play into that narrative personally. Let matchup be aside there, in that sense. Anything else on quarterback?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think you're going to see really low, at least for my personal exposure, you're going to see really low captain exposure for me on both of these guys. I'll reserve that to some of these higher ceiling skill position players. I
do completely agree with that, because I think if Siemian is able to get there from like just playing from behind perspective, it's coming alongside one of those, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson types of guys. And we already kind of covered the Flacco front. All right, let's talk. Let's start with the Jets on the running back side of things. Breece Hall broke the slate in week 16, was in fact the guy you needed in a good matchup there. This matchup's kind of, in my opinion, it's a little bit more neutral, and you kind of break it down in your article, because stuff rate, this seems really good. So like straight up in between the tackles, first and second down, Breece Hall stuff, I'm not expecting that much. But Breece Hall, that's not what I'm looking to get out of him anyway from a ceiling case. I'm looking for the huge plays. I'm looking for screen passes to the house. I'm looking for him to just break one. And the Browns are somewhat susceptible to those type of plays. So for me, no issues with anything I'm seeing here on Breece Hall. Total ownership, salary, captain, this all seems rather efficient to me.
Yeah, this is a classic Gary Hartman spot where we probably come in at or around the field in terms of his total ownership across our 20 max, 150 max, single entry, 3 max sets, whatever you're building tonight, and come in a little bit or quite a bit over at the captain spot because of that ability for him to break those big plays and the matchup against the Browns that are kind of susceptible to those plays, as you alluded to. There's going to be a lot of first and second down runs for Breece Hall where he's going to get stuffed. Negative yardage plays, maybe picks up 2 yards in a cloud of dust. The Browns defense ranks second in stuff rate at 52.1%, and they are allowing the second fewest yards before contact per attempt, but they also allow the league's highest explosive rush rate. So that means, for every 5 or 6 plays where Breece Hall is stuffed for 2 or 3 yard gain or a loss, there's going to be one of those plays where he can break 120 plus yards. If you're playing him at captain, you kind of hope that he takes that thing to the house, and you really don't need those other plays to get there. But I think because of that matchup against the Browns rush defense that has been susceptible to those explosive plays, and a defense that's allowing a 16.7% target share to opposing running backs, that's where Breece Hall has done his damage of late. He's really been a PPR-friendly back, and specifically if we're playing on DraftKings with them profiling to be down for a majority of this game as big underdogs, I think that Breece Hall is probably my favorite option on the Jets side. We'll talk about Garrett Wilson in a second making a case, but I think that Breece Hall is the way that you can beat this Browns defense if there's a way to get there.
That's where I'm at, man. The guy had 12 catches with Siemian last week on 16 targets, at least according to DraftKings metrics. I don't have PFF in front of me, but somewhere between 15 and 16 targets there for Breece Hall last week. And, game script says, and Browns prolific pass rush says, somebody needs to get the ball out quick tonight. And the Jets offensive line struggled with all their injury concerns. I think Breece has a really nice floor due to that pass game work. And if he's to break one, maybe it could be a third down, run, explosive pass play. But I think that explosive play might come off a screen or something like that. So 43 points last week. If gun to my head, you said who repeats last week's performance over 40 points? Is it Breece Hall or is it Amari Cooper? I would say it's Breece Hall. And we'll talk about Amari Cooper in a second. But just based off how those players are going to need to be used in their offenses, what the spread is in this game, individual matchup, Breece is my favorite of that group, at least to repeat last week's performance. Going down the depth chart here, rookie is Izzy Abanikanda. They released Michael Carter a handful of weeks ago to kind of make room for him, and he has surpassed Dalvin Cook as the second option here in this backfield. Certainly, I think worth a sprinkle. You mentioned the value on this slate is subpar, if you will, so 2,200. Abanikanda, any interest there?
It still feels like a little steep at 11%. And I think because
Yep.
of the lack of value, that could even creep up in some of the smaller field contests where you really need that $2,200 save, that $2,200 price tag in order to fit in guys like Cooper and Flacco and Wilson and Bree Hall. I think you could see Abanaconda's ownership come up even more. I have a tough time seeing it. I don't know if there's going to be enough volume there in week 16 when Brees was kind of going nuts. His volume got reined in a little bit. 26% rush share, was only in a route for 10% of dropbacks. Really where we saw Abanaconda get a lot of usage. His highest snap share game of the season was in week 15 when they were getting blown out, when they pulled Bree Hall, who only had a 36% snap share. And then you saw Abanaconda kind of get up there a little bit more, 36% rush share in that game in week 15, 37% route participation. So I suppose if you wanted to do something like, if Bree Hall does not appear in the lineup, or if the lineup does not contain Bree Hall at captain or flex, maybe you could boost Abanaconda 8%, 12%, 16%, kind of see where your exposures shake out. But I think the games in which he gets there at 2,200 are probably the games where Bree Hall is much less involved because of blowout or some other factor.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, I think Brees is going to be the third down back and the guy involved in the pass game. So if that's something that we're kind of looking to expose this Browns team defense with, maybe that's not Abanaconda. So we'll talk through all the discount options maybe at the end, and we'll kind of rank them up for you if this is a tight slate. From a pricing perspective, Dalvin Cook, I can't get there. The guy's totally cooked, and we don't even need to talk about it.
We can not waive that one.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Cleveland backs. This has really become a split backfield over the last 2 weeks, or since Kareem Hunt's kind of been merged now. Jerome Ford still getting the majority of the base down work. Certainly the projection looks nicer there, but between Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt, he is $3,000, $3,200 more. Plus, Kareem Hunt's getting a lot of the goal line stuff. So I don't think this is as clean of a split necessarily as this projection and ownership would make it sound.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because we haven't had a bunch of Browns showdown slates lately, or if because neither of these guys have really been super in play for main slates for me of late. But I really hadn't seen, wasn't aware of how this backfield split had kind of grown throughout this season. But really since week 6, we've seen kind of a consistent split where Jerome Ford leads the duo in rushing share, 44% to 37%. He's running more routes. He's got a higher target share. He's involved more on long down and distance, more in 2-minute situations, which, I guess I really hadn't expected, but it's really been highly in favor of Jerome Ford in those situations, 59% to 31% in long down and distance, 76% to 6% in 2-minute snaps. So really, kind of between the 20s, and in those high leverage passing down situations, it's really been Jerome Ford's backfield. But as you alluded to, Kareem Hunt has kind of made his bread in the short down and distance opportunities where he leads the backfield 69% to 28% and attempts inside the 5-yard line, getting that goal line work with 10 carries to Jerome Ford's 3. So I think you could see the situation where Jerome Ford kind of racks up the volume between the tackles, between the 20s, getting some of those pass down opportunities against a Jets defense that can get pressure and is really good in the secondary. And then all of a sudden you get Kareem Hunt in there, who is the guy that's getting those short down and distance goal line opportunities, and the guy that's maybe racking up touchdowns if they're getting near the goal line. So I think because of the overall price tag here, we talk about that a lot. We're looking at 12.6, 13.6 for these guys combined. I think you can play them together, given the lack of overall value on the slate. If you think that this game goes the way that Vegas does, where the Browns do blow out the Jets, I think you can play both Ford and Kareem Hunt together. I think from an optimal perspective, just based off of pure volume, based off of Jerome Ford's involvement in the pass game, if you're looking to pick just one out of this backfield, I'll try and find the $3,200 to get up to Jerome Ford from Kareem Hunt. I think he's just the overall better option here.
I think he's the better option. I think he's got the better chance at a big play for a touchdown. We saw like those wheelbarrow routes in the middle of the season. The problem is, in my opinion, JoeFlaco is like a legit end of career Brett Favre gunslinger on this Browns team. Now, it's a different story against this Jets defense. So, I'm kind of playing a catch-22 in my own head where, can we get that pass? And his first 2 starts with Flacco, I think he still had around 5 targets. So, he's still there. But Joe Flacco's first instinct isn't to check down to the running back. He wants to push the ball downfield. Ford's upside comes with those checkdowns, in my opinion. Maybe we can get a little bit more against a Jets team that, can really defend the outside. What I would do, I know we haven't gotten to receivers yet, we will in a second, I would be a max 2 of Ford, Hunt, and Elijah Moore. I don't think all 3 of those guys, as Moore being kind of an extension of the run game, attacking that middle of the field. Njoku has too much of an upside with Flacco to include him in that role. But I do think we haven't seen the ceiling consistently with Moore, where I think kind of making that a max 2 is an interesting way to attack this game. Personally, it sounds like I'm a little bit more bullish on Hunt than you, because I think that there's going to be some goal line opportunities tonight. Hunt has 8 rushing touchdowns on the season. I like that salary saving. You can play them together. I'd probably prefer not to, but you definitely can, especially in 4-2, 5-1 Brown stuff. So, all things to consider, no doubt. I don't dislike Ford from a captain perspective. I guess he's right in the mix of Njoku and Cooper. And when you take a matchup into account, let's get there and maybe we'll compare it all together. Actually, let's just stay on the Browns and let's go over to let's just keep them on the screen for a second. Let's go over to the pass catcher side. So, yeah, he's right in between Amari and Njoku from a captain perspective. So it just, to me, I don't know. I got a weird feeling that I don't know if that's kind of where I'd want to click on too much in captain, even though the way you do score on the Jets, I know I'm rambling here, has been through the season when people have had success through running back. So it's kind of, I really am struggling with the Ford piece.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot on past slates where we at ETR have missed on ownership. A lot of those times where we've missed has been with home favored running backs that we end up coming in way lower than we probably should on. Now, I know Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt aren't exactly the prototypical examples of that. Usually we're looking at like high volume, elite bell cow backs that tend to get steamed up. But if there's a guy that I worry that we're low on, and again, as the recurring theme of this show, we'll get to Brown's defense in a second. I think I'm low on their captain ownership as well. But I think if there's a skill position spot that I miss on, that I'm too low, it's going to end up being Jerome Ford. I think people will worry about the matchup for Amari Cooper. I think people will worry similarly about the overall pass game environment for David Njoku. I don't think anybody's going to want to play these secondary and tertiary Browns receivers or tight ends as well. And I think a lot of that's going to end up funneling to Jerome Ford. He's also cheaper than cheaper than Amari Cooper, priced right around David Njoku. If you try to tell yourself a story, okay, I think this game goes as Vegas expects, that means a lot more work for Jerome Ford on the ground. That also probably means a few more dump offs too. I think you could see this ownership creep up to 13, 14, 15%, which if it gets to that point, then I'm much more interested in Njoku and Cooper.
Yeah, I usually don't do this, so I just want to pull up everything here. So if the field is going to play a lot of Browns heavy onslaught stuff and they want that correlation of Browns defense mixed with Jerome Ford, and that's going to funnel a lot more Browns defense captains because they're 3,000 less than Ford, I want Ford captain with Browns defense in the flex if I want that onslaught. So I'd rather flip that because I think most of the combinations in that sense to squeeze as many studs on the Brown side as they can will have Browns captain with Ford in the flex. So if I'm getting that correlation where I just think it's going to be like 38-7 Browns, give me Ford in the captain, Browns defense in the flex. That's kind of the way I would flip things around personally. We'll talk about the Browns defense when we get there. All right, let's hone in on the pass catchers themselves. So we've already talked about Amari Cooper, 11-2. Is that the most expensive play on the slate? I saw Brees was 11.
It is, yep.
Yeah, most expensive play on the slate. Oh, I don't even have what Garrett Wilson is. Garrett Wilson only 9. All right, we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so most expensive play on the slate, and for good reason. I mean, not only broke, it was defeated. It was deflating, if you will. I played not full MME build in main slate last week, but I finally had a chance to do a real run in there. I have not got to play full MME this much this season, and I like my build. I think I had a solid build, but I was I like 5% Amari Cooper. He was 10% or 11% owned in large field DK stuff. And anytime you're under the field and a guy that's not only going to score 30 points, not only going to score 40 points, but score 50 DraftKings points, your day is over. And it's really deflating. And that was that kind of game for Amari Cooper last week. He goes from that to the toughest matchup possible potentially for an outside wide receiver. Coming off everyone riding high, the entire field wanting to click on him because, clearly this Flacco throwing the ball downfield stuff, and he's super expensive. If you can't see what I'm getting here, I'm willing to take an underweight position on Amari Cooper tonight. What say you?
Yeah, I'm with you. And if there wasn't a classic carry spot with Bree Hall before, this is a classic carry spot as well. I think he's way less likely to be optimal than that 55, 56% ownership that we have right now. But I do think that if he finds his way to be optimal, it's going to be at the captain spot because we see something not like that 54-point outburst that he had last week, but something like a 25 plus in that vicinity because he still has that upside with Joe under center, even against DJ Reed, even against Sauce Gardner and this elite New York Jets secondary. So I do want to have some exposure, whether it's across a three single entry, 3 max type set, or whether it's across 20 entry or MME, complete MME build. I want to have some exposure to Amari Cooper, and I think probably get even a little bit over that 13%. if I had to force it. There's still just an awesome role here. And I know it's an impossibly tough matchup. You don't need me to tell you that against this Jets secondary. They've been elite all season, have held wide receivers under their averages in every single game this season, as pointed out by ESPN's Mike Clay. It's just so good. There's nothing negative you can say about any of these Jets defensive backs. But still, all that to say, an awesome role here for Amari Cooper, 28.5% target share, 51.2% air yard share, 31.3% red zone target share since Flacco has taken over. I don't think this Browns offense is going to remain as pass happy as it has been, but I still think that they're going to be a little bit more pass happy than they were through week 12. And so for that, I think there's still an awesome opportunity here for Cooper to get way above that expectation for him. And if I want to get my exposure to him, it's going to mostly come at the captain spot. I'm going to be way under that 56% in flex, though.
We should note is technically questionable with a heel injury. I know the note this morning was hopeful to play. I would imagine he's going to go tonight, but keep an eye here. Projections obviously will change. And the whole slate changes if he's out from a value perspective and everything. Yes. So I don't have any further updates. I don't know if you do, but we're going to just talk about him as if he's in. I agree with your take on Amari Cooper. There's, even though I would be under the field, particularly in flex, there's no doubt that he is not a jag. He's a gam, if you will. This is a grown-ass man, for sure.
George brings up a good point. I think if there were the reason why his ownership is where it is because we've got the money, I suppose, to get up there to some degree. And if you don't get up there, it probably just ends up meaning a little bit more Flacco, maybe a little bit more Bree Hall, maybe a little bit more Njoku. But great point from George. Q tag plus the matchup. Just plus overall offensive environment concerns here for the passing attack. I think you'll probably see Amari Cooper's ownership come in lower than what we have right now.
Okay. Still maybe my best flag plan of all time on a Showdown slate was that Njoku Thursday night game. I think it was like week 6 last year, and he ended up single digits and just had like 30 DraftKings points. And something else that we've really seen is a JoeFlaco and David Njoku connection. Another grown-ass man, in my opinion, in David Njoku, sub 8K, getting pricey for a tight end at 7-8, but what his role has ultimately been over the last 3 weeks has been nothing short of awesome. And, if Amari Cooper is going to be banged up a little bit, I am willing to go to Njoku. Now, Njoku did not have the type of game he had in week 14 and 15 with Flacco. Those games, if you will allow me, is 6 for 91 and 2 for 27 DraftKings points, 10 for 104 and 1 for 29.4 DraftKings points. And last week, he only had a lowly 16.4 on the 6 for 44 and a touchdown. However, still obviously perfectly fine, 9 targets there too. However, this is a matchup. We said we're going to talk a lot about matchups for the Browns pass catchers where I'm more willing to attack the middle of the field than I am the outside. So Amari Cooper, and we'll talk about Cedric Tillman in a second. Maybe I come in later on them. Maybe I'm getting heavier on Njoku and Elijah Moore, and I just love this Njoku connection. So where I said I'm going to be under the field on Cooper, I think my initial gut, without having done too much building yet, would be over the field on David Njoku here tonight.
Yeah, this feels like it's going to be a recurring theme for my builds tonight, but because I think so much of the field is going to get to the defenses, both the Jets and the Browns, and enough of the field is going to get to Flacco that I can get like as much leverage possible with all of the rest of the skill position players, because I think a little bit of the field is going to be scared off by the rightfully and terrifying opposing matchups that these guys face. And the matchup for Njoku really isn't that great, but if you're going to give me sub 10% on David Njoku because so much of the field wants to play JoeFlaco and so much of the field wants to play Browns DST at captain, sign me up, man. I think that's another awesome spot. I probably come in at or around the field in total ownership, 40 to 45% range. But I think another spot where you tell me, before the slate locks, if I could get 13 to 15% on him, come in a little bit overweight the field on Njoku captain, looks like an awesome spot for me. So I'm feeling pretty confident that I'm going to be overexposed to the Browns pass catching core at captain and probably have kind of around the field or a little bit less in flex.
I think if anyone was to catch some narrative hype tonight, it would be Elijah Moore. That is the revenge game for him. Still someone that I think, JoeFlaco trusts. Now he's clearly developed after that first game with Flacco where Elijah Moore had like 12 targets. He's come back down to earth, which has been what we've seen most of this year, which is like capping out at like 10 points, 8, 9, 10 points. But still someone that Flacco trusts. I mentioned kind of maybe that max 2 rule with the running backs, because I think this is the type of spot, Njoku could be looped into this too. that Flacco might need to attack tonight. If the Jets are having success both defending the outside receivers and getting pressure on Flacco, I think this middle of the field may shine. I know some people in chat have already kind of been talking about Elijah Moore. Not much ownership here. I know we haven't seen the massive ceiling games out of him for most of this year, but I still believe in the talent. I'd be willing to sprinkle him into my captain pool with this ownership. Do you have any thoughts on the slot man, Elijah Moore here?
Yeah, I think the price tag is what's really awesome here. If the price tag had been any lower, I think you'd see more of the field wanting to go there instead of some of the options that are priced right around it. But I think that price tag at 6,600 is actually going to keep him in check. He's not really in play for cash games. I think he's far too expensive to consider for cash games. And when people are clicking in tournament lineups and they're going to be looking at like, okay, I've got, right around 6K-ish left. Can I maybe upgrade a spot and get in the Browns defense for 5,600? Or do I want to play a second pass catcher, with Elijah Moore in the lineup? And I think a lot of people will just side with, okay, give me the defense that it has Myles Garrett and one of the best secondaries in the league against Trevor Siemian and this terrible Jets offensive line. And I think a lot of that is going to force lower ownership here on Elijah Moore. He's really actually priced too closely to David Njoku, in my opinion, as well. All of those things are bad for any optimal type setting. So if you're building a cash game lineup, you kind of have to ignore that, kind of have to keep Elijah Moore out of consideration there. But when we're talking about trying to find leverage in small and large field GPPs, I think he's going to be low enough that he profiles as a good flex option and a good captain option. Keep talking about trying to get overweight on some of these pass catchers. You with Njoku, me with both Cooper and Njoku. I think you can throw Elijah Moore right into that mix, and you don't even have to soak up too much of your total exposure here to have an overweight stance on Elijah Moore. If you get 5-6%, you're already double the field without having to sacrifice too many of your overall lineup. So I do like, has been a recurring theme already, getting overweight on Elijah Moore at captain.
Yeah, that Njoku Moore tier as pivots to Amari, plus just me liking kind of the situational matchup stuff, I'm really into tonight. Cedric Tillman's the guy that has come on as a true wide receiver 2, 3, if you will, over the last handful of weeks. You wrote about it in your article, especially since they've shipped off Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think a somewhat talented player here, 3K, will be running most, I think, 2 receiver sets. Any thoughts on Tillman here?
Yeah, the problem with Tillman, I think, is we've already talked at length about how there isn't a whole lot of value options. We'll talk a little bit more on the Jets side. There might be a few options on the Jets side, but I think because he is the one guy, the one skill position guy, kind of in that sub 3,600 range, sub 4K range, I think you're going to see his ownership get played up quite a bit. And especially in small field stuff, I think you could see that 15, 16% come up closer to like 20, 25% or more. And we talk about it with these guys that because they have, okay base projections and because they're cheap enough, they generally find their way into the cash game consideration. Those types of guys generally find their way, they end up being way more owned in small and large field GPPs than they probably should be. So if we're looking at somebody that's 15 or 16% now and flips at 20, 25%, I think he becomes a much worse play. So I think that Tillman in his own right, just because of the role that he has, is fine. Just understand that if you're playing him, you're probably going to end up playing into a little bit more ownership than you would generally be comfortable with.
Yeah, I agree there. Not much to add. Any other names you're considering here? You mentioned David Bell being somewhat involved. Looks like, that tight end, 2 roles kind of being split between Harrison Bryant and Jordan Akins here. Any favorite punts of this group?
Yeah, not really a favorite, but if you're somebody that is 150ing, this is a way, I think, on this slate to get different, where I think overall scoring is probably going to be down. If you got like a 1 for 10 and 1 from Harrison Bryant or David Bell or Marquise Goodwin or any of these guys, it could end up being enough. Some slates it's not, because you see a bunch of scoring, and ultimately if you get 7-8 DraftKings points, it doesn't usually amount to much. I think here that could certainly be optimal, and if it means that you get the salary relief to get up to some of these other guys like Cooper and Bree Hall, definitely makes sense. All these guys are going to come with really low ownership because you're looking at base projections between 1 and 2 DraftKings points. I think you should absolutely be mixing in the guys from David Bell to Marquise Goodwin throughout your even 20 max sets, but definitely your 150 max sets.
Okay, let's talk Jets pass catchers here. And I think you worded it really well in your article, where obviously if they had a real quarterback all year, this should have and could have been a huge season for Garrett Wilson. But you got to respect the numbers and what he's been able to produce, even with the shitty quarterbacks, for lack of a better word, shitty quarterback play that he has been experiencing all year. Just a mega talent that can elevate whatever quarterback he has. Now, if he had a real quarterback and something we'll look into next year if it's Rodgers or whoever else. I think he'll still have that, second round ADP. But here we are in week 17, and he's sub 10K for a super talented player. Again, I've kind of already waxed poetic about my thoughts on Bree Hall tonight, but you definitely get ownership discounts, both the captain and flex from Brees. And I don't know how often you want to play these guys together unless you're going heavy on Jet stuff. So I guess give me your Garrett Wilson spiel.
Yeah, I mean, man, going through like his usage and his efficiency metrics relative to the rest of the pass catchers on his team, it's really quite depressing because he feels like he's been, even with Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian and Zach Wilson under center, he's honestly it's been a pretty damn good year, and it would be close to a mega year for Garrett Wilson if he had decent, even average, or even slightly below average quarterback play. I'm bad at the comparisons, but I can't imagine where we would be considering him if Aaron Rodgers had stayed healthy all season, right. At least in terms of fantasy production. He'd be right up there with some of the best on the entire season, just with the volume that he's gotten and how much he separates from a talent perspective from the other pass catchers on his team. And because of that, because of the talent, because of his ability to earn targets, because of the overall volume here, it still keeps him in play at 9,800 with really some of the worst quarterback play in the entire league. It's a 30.6% target share, 45.2% air yard share, 37% red zone target share. He still leads the team in end zone targets. If anybody's going to get it done from the Jets pass catching core, it's Garrett Wilson, number 1, 2, and 3. There's really nobody else. However, we've got Trevor Siemian here, and we also have a Browns secondary that has been nearly as good as the Jets secondary at limiting opposing receivers to fantasy production. So that's the biggest concern here, obviously, is that Trevor Siemian can't find him the ball. And then when he does, the Browns secondary is just right there to make sure that these targets are rather inefficient from Garrett Wilson's perspective. There's still a few reasons to be optimistic here. The Browns secondary is defending the league's 4th highest target share to opposing perimeter receivers, according to fantasy points data, at a 45.5% clip. That's where Wilson's running 67.2% of his routes. And there's just nobody else. Nobody else is earning targets at even a league average level. So I think that you're looking at Bree Hall out of the backfield as a pass catcher and Garrett Wilson, and that's really it. The rest of these guys, we still have to talk about them because it's a single game slate. But I think this is another spot where so much of the field is going to go to the defenses and, go to JoeFlaco at captain. Another spot where I can comfortably get above the field without having to go nuts. I don't need to have 20, 30% captain exposure to Garrett Wilson, but I think I can find an overweight position at 12, 13, 14% and feel pretty comfortable about that.
I'd also want to be over the field. I mentioned the 16 targets for Bree Hall. Garrett Wilson was no slouch. He had 15 of his own. Now, Trevor Siemian dropped back 49 times. So that's over 60, 61% of his targets last week went to those two players. This is a very condensed offense right now. And Garrett Wilson's ceiling in this matchup, if they're playing from behind once again, mega. And similarly to how he's been able to produce even with any quarterbacks, he's the kind of receiver, in my opinion, that could also kind of overcome a bad matchup as well. So definitely interested in Garrett Wilson. I still prefer Brees because I just think the way that they might have to check down here tonight is going to be important. But it's not that much of a gap, in my opinion. Yeah, let's go to these other guys here. I think Tyler Conklin, the next most interesting, that 5K range. So he's kind of around the Kareem Hunts of the world here. And, everyone else, Xavier Gipson, Jason Brownley, question marks as far as, how much will they use? How many targets are they going to really get? Conklin, although it's not the best matchup in the world, at least we know he's going to be out there. He's going to have a very steady role. After Garrett Wilson, he's the guy that I have the most confidence to be, next most involved after Garrett Wilson and Bree Hall.
Yeah, and if you think the matchup's going to get easier because the Browns are so good against opposing wide receivers, you think it's going to be easier for Tyler Conklin? Guess again. The Browns are allowing the league's second fewest DraftKings points to opposing tight ends this season. I don't think the matchup gets any easier for Conklin, but of the non-Garrett Wilson / Bree Hall skill position players on the Jets side of the ball, he's the best price adjusted play. So if you don't have the money because you're jamming in the Browns studs, you don't have the money to get up to Bree Hall, don't have the money to get up to Garrett Wilson, I think Tyler Conklin is the next best option given his price tag and given his overall usage. We're still seeing a pretty decent target share at 16.2%, 7.1 yard ADOT should mean that his targets are at least a little bit more likely to be caught than some of the downfield options that are not named Garrett Wilson. It's going to be tough though, because I think that enough of the field's going to get there that you don't get this huge ownership discount. The only thing that probably insulates Tyler Conklin from getting too crazy in terms of his overall ownership is that you have the Browns defense right by him. So I think he's going to be owned. I think it's rightfully so. He's a decent value option, but I do think that we're probably going to see pretty healthy ownership on Tyler Conklin.
Yep, agreed. Let's stay on the second tight end here, actually, because Kenny Yeboah has passed CJ Uzoma. I see Schmohawks in chat asking about Yeboah. This is a slate where value is really rough. We're talking about tight ends on Showdown, and he's one of our few stone 200 guys here. I know it's kind of a little out of practice for me to get to him before we get into the secondary Jets receivers, but I think it's an interesting note. It hasn't really put up any points. I think he had one target last week, but any interest there?
Yeah, it's funny that you skipped to Yeboah because I think we can almost just do this conversation together. And I hate to,
yeah.
I hate to not wave an entire position group, but Xavier Gipson, Jason Brownley, Kenny Yeboah, Allen Lazard, even Zach Kuntz, who will be like tight end 3. I think you can almost consider, and I hate to be so restrictive of these rules. I have tried to be way less restrictive this season to trying to get me onto some weirder lineups that are more likely to be unique. I think because of the overall volume here and the overall efficiency or inefficiency expectations from the Jets offense, I think you can honestly just consider a max 1 rule of any non-Garrett Wilson / Tyler Conklin Jets pass catcher. I don't know if I want to play Xavier Gipson and Kenny Yeboah together. I don't know if I want to play Xavier Gipson and Jason. I think this is a max 1 situation. And from Xavier Gipson at 3,200 down to Zach Kuntz at 200, I think that's almost just a max 1 spot. You rotate them through where they fit from a salary perspective and not consider too much else about it. But these guys are going to come through with like a 6 to 8% target share. They might get a few targets. It's tough to get excited about any one of them. I think from a, on-field perspective, what we saw last week was Jason Brownley kind of take over for Allen Lazard. So maybe that is a direct max 1 situation where if Jason Brownley is in your lineup, you do not play Allen Lazard. I think those two are in direct competition for playing time. And, really all these guys kind of make that rule, though. I don't want to play multiples of these Jets pass catchers together that are not named Garrett Wilson or Tyler Conklin.
Yeah. I think that is totally reasonable. Do you have a preference between Gipson and Brownley of those two?
Maybe if it just for no other reason than kind of the unknown factor, I think it's Jason Brownley. We have seen what Xavier Gipson has kind of been. He's taken over that slot role for Randall Cobb, and he's been on the field a bunch. Really hasn't had a high targets per route run rate. But Jason Brownley, I guess, is just a little bit more of an unknown. Came in last week, 88% route participation in week 16. That was when Allen Lazard really got slashed, 25% route participation for Lazard. Still didn't put up a big game for Jason Brownley, had 8 DraftKings points on those 88% route participation. But we have a big enough sample here from Xavier Gipson that I think I would rather just take shots on the unknown with Jason Brownley. And shout out team preseason. He was a guy that kind of balled out on occasion in preseason. I'll take my shots there.
Yeah. Agree there. All right. We're getting to 45 minutes here. Let's talk DST and kickers, and let's start with that Cleveland Browns discussion. No doubt it's a great matchup. They're home. They're 7.5-point favorites. It's Trevor Siemian. Jets have been maybe the Commanders have been the most feastable offense to attack for fantasy defenses, but the Jets have been right there as well. 50% total ownership. We're looking at 11.4% captain. What are you doing?
Yeah, I think you guys know by now. I wish they would have priced him up because honestly, the Browns DST is a cash game option, if not a cash game lock. At this point, you have a Cleveland DST that ranks, a Cleveland front 7 that ranks second in ESPN's pass rush win rate. They get a Jets offensive line that ranks 26th in the same category. They're at home as 7-point favorites against Trevor Siemian. They should absolutely dominate. And for that reason, I think that they're one of the safest sources of fantasy production in that range, like 6K and below, one of the safest sources of fantasy value that you can find on any slate, let alone just this single game slate. I think they probably give you like 8 to 10 points with upside of, 12, 14, 16, 18 points. In any cash game contest, you probably want the Browns DST. However, we're looking at a DST that is our ownership model cannot account for how owned the Browns defense is actually going to be. I've tried to make manual adjustments to this, try to use a little bit of brain power here. where the wheels are still slowly turning up here. They probably will come in closer to 60% total ownership, probably 15% or more at captain ownership. And the one thing that we always come back to with defenses in fantasy, extremely tough to predict. You can get a really great real life defensive performance from the Browns today, where they allow the Jets to score 3 points or 6 points, and they only end up with like 10 or 12 DraftKings points. 10 or 12 DraftKings points is nice, but it's probably not going to be enough to give you a captain worthy performance, and might not even be enough to give you a flex worthy performance. So yes, the Browns defense, great overall spot tonight. The volatility of defensive scoring in fantasy is the reason why I'm going to come in way underweight wherever they end up coming in at captain. I'll probably have a couple of percentage points across the 150 set. I'm not going to completely rule it out, but I think if you look at my exposures tonight, I'm going to maybe see 1 to 2% versus the field's 15 to 16%. So for me, going to be a way underweight stance. May not get to any. I'm not entirely sure, but just know that it's a great spot. You don't need me to tell you guys that at this point, but not a spot where I think, given the volatility of the position, we should be playing into 15, 16, 17% ownership.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really tough spot there for the captain. So I assume in flex there, are they like a cash game lock for you in flex there?
I think so. The value's so bad. The offensive environment here in particular is so bad that I think you just play them in cash and move on. 5,600 is too cheap. They should probably be like 7K. They should probably be right there around Njoku, Elijah Moore. If you look at just the base projection and sort by base projection, they should be right there, kind of in like that 7 to 7,500 range. And because they're way cheaper and because there's not a lot of skill position value, I think you just play them in cash and move on. Yep,
that's fair. Jets thoughts?
Jets are still going to get played because of the overall question marks for the offensive environment from both sides. The Jets will probably get played more than you would see any 7-point road underdog get played. I think there's some merit to it. Again, mostly in flex. I think they end up being more optimal. At least our sims think they end up being more optimal than their ownership would indicate at flex. Part of the reason I think that I like them tonight is because of because of the pass rate that we've seen from Cleveland. And again, we want our defenses to be facing offenses that are going to be dropping back frequently in order to generate those fantasy points that we're after. And I think we're going to see JoeFlaco dropping back a ton, or at least enough. And if that's the case, the Jets secondary is good enough on the back end. They can generate pressure enough without having to blitz that I think you'll probably see enough opportunities here. So at 4K, I think another spot that I want to come in overweight at the flex position in small and large field tournaments, but probably come in still under that 5% at captain.
Yeah, I know Flacco's been amazing, but what JoeFlaco's been for the last 7-8 years is one thing, and he still has 5 picks over the last 2 weeks. The guy's going to sling, and this is definitely a great defense still, especially in the secondary. So, I think they're a very interesting play for sure tonight. If you're saying I'm curious, what is over half interception? It's got to be -2 something, I'd imagine. So if you're saying that you're almost guaranteed to get an interception tonight for this defense, you never know what can happen. I think it's interesting. All right, kickers. I guess Riley Patterson is the guy right now for Cleveland. Dustin Hopkins injured or whatever, so they called him up after he's been the guy that was the Lions kicker for most of this year. Certainly the side that I probably have a little bit more interest on, with the Browns being 7.5-point dogs in a sub 40 game environment, but you still got Greg Oleg on the other side. Any kicker thoughts tonight?
Yeah, I think I prefer both defenses just straight up to these guys, but I think you'll see enough of an ownership discount here that they make sense in small and large field GPPs. I just think that these guys are both priced and projected in terms of ownership close enough to the Jets defense that I would prefer, if building one lineup, just prefer to play the Jets defense. I think there's a little bit more upside there. But in a gross game that finishes, 15-12 or finishes 24-9 or something like that, you could certainly see these guys get there. So I would not rule them out. I think ownership feels pretty good here. I don't see any one of them steaming up for any particular reason. So I don't have any question marks about that. I think if I was building out a 150 set, my personal exposure would be right around where the field's at right now.
Yep, I agree there. All right, Cody, I don't really have time for questions because I got to jump over to the NBA streets shortly. So let's dive right into flag plants. Let's end the 2023 year strong here, Cody. Who do you like this evening.
Yeah, I'm going back to kind of a spot that we've been gifted a lot this year, and it has been backup quarterbacks that the field doesn't want to click in. And the easiest way to play those guys is generally in flex. And if I'm going to be playing those guys more than the field is in flex, there's a certain player that I want at captain, and that is Garrett Wilson. If Trevor Siemian gives me a flex-worthy performance, I think a majority of those times it's going to come with Garrett Wilson giving me a captain-worthy performance and someone that can be the slate's highest scoring player. Massive 30.6% target share, 45.2% air yard share, still leads the team in red zone targets and end zone targets. Really no one even close to him on the team. And I still think he's been knocking on the door all dang season for one of these massive, truly eruption type games. Doesn't feel great to bet on it happening here against an elite Browns secondary with Trevor Siemian under center, but the field seems to not think it's going to happen either. And if the field doesn't think it's going to happen, I'm going to go the opposite direction. I kind of think it will happen tonight. Give me Garrett Wilson at captain. A lot of those captain teams coming with Trevor Siemian at flex.
A classic Cody flag plant, in my opinion, and I like it a lot. I agree. I want to get over the field in Siemian and flex, like by a good amount. And I agree that most of the time that means I want Wilson and captain, but I also think it could be Bree Hall. I'm not going there with my flag plant, but I do think when you think about what I'm a big proponent of quarterbacks with running backs in general in all forms of DFS. I know someone had asked before if you're playing the Hall captain lineups, can you play Siemian in flex? And I think absolutely. I think you could definitely see where some of that pass game work is going there too. But no doubt from a push the ball downfield, if there's Siemian success, it's coming on the back of Garrett Wilson more often than it is Bree Hall. You're also saving $1,200 from Wilson to Hall and less ownership. So I like the call quite a bit. I want to go to one of these middle of the field Browns guys. And I think I'm going to go to David Njoku because Elijah Moore, I just haven't seen the ceiling enough. I really do like Elijah Moore as a tournament contrarian play this week, but we have not seen the ceiling enough. What we have seen is a really nice floor ceiling combo on David Njoku since Flacco's come over, and that sub 10% captain ownership is just enough for me to like it. Somebody in chat asked before as well, if Jerome Ford does get some steam as one of those home favorite running backs, could that come off of Njoku? I'm hoping, because I want Njoku to be as low as possible because I would be slamming him in to my lineups here tonight. So let me hopefully lightning strikes again for me on the Njoku flag plant here.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. That will do it here. Best of luck to all of you in championship week. You know what that means. All different types of championships this week in the fantasy realm. And of course, best of luck to you in DFS. Please do show some love to this video and the YouTube page. Give us a thumbs up. This video is free. We've been bringing you them free Thursday, Monday night videos all season. We hope you've enjoyed them. We have one more regular season week for all of you, and we'll be back on is there a Monday night game? There isn't a Monday night game, right? So we are not going to be back for a Monday night game, which is New Year's Day. You'll see. We'll keep you in touch with what our schedule will be. I know there's a Saturday Island game on December 30th. Lions Cowboys. That's a big one. Cody,
and I think week 18. I think week 18 is just Sunday night football.
Wow. So this could be our last free show. Yeah, for sure. We'll talk about. I think if anything else we do, we should. I know people have been prying for the behind the paywall stuff. So yeah, we do appreciate you all for tuning in all year. Please do show some love. Go check out anything we have going on in Establish the Run. If you're still interested, we will be taking it home through the Super Bowl with all of our content, DFS, props, and otherwise. And then, of course, VTR NBA Streets. If you're an NBA fan, we still have our holiday sale going on. So if you go to establishtherun.com/NBA-subscribe, you can check out everything we have going on there. We have some discounted packages across all our products, continuing to crush. Made a lot of money for people last night on our Nets takes. Very excited for the rest of that season. And if you're someone that's going to be missing football and thinking about dipping your feet into the waters of NBA, this will be a great time to do so with football winding down and the sale going on. All right. For Cody, I am Gary. Thank you all. Best of luck tonight. And we will see you down the road. Take care, everybody.